I think what we've realized over the last couple of years is that there's this whole highly valuable corpus of data that has not been digitized historically, and that is data from conversations, from us talking. Emails are all digitized, documents, etc., all digitized. We have structured data. But in the end, the conversations that happen in meetings are often very high signal in that, this is where you get a lot of context and people are, really thinking through, for the most part, what they're trying to say. And a lot of decisions are made in meetings. A lot of the most important decisions are made in meetings. So ultimately, having that be digitized is really important to ensure that if you're using an LLM, you're getting the full picture. And I think, like you were saying, yeah, I might have talked to someone 3 years ago, and I want to actually go back and understand what we talked about, especially if I'm meeting that person again.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm Kevin Lee with the eMarketing Association. I also run Did It for most of my week, which is a digital marketing agency. Also run Truth Nutrition and a nonprofit, Giving Forward, as well as launching some innovative AI-powered voicemail drop platforms as a side hustle under my incubator. And AI is the theme this year and probably for the last year and probably for infinite number of years going forward at this point. So I'm super excited to have Mark Heynen with me, who founded Knap on the premise that it's super important for people to take control of their own data as it relates to how it's used within an AI for helping themselves and potentially for allowing others access to that data or not. So what was the catalyst, Mark, for you deciding that the current infrastructure in the AI ecosystem wasn't handling that issue properly?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it, Kevin. So I'm a serial founder. I started my first company in my 20s, and I generally love problems where there's an access issue, where there's emerging technology and there's some structural barrier to people starting to use that technology. Because usually if you find a way to unblock that barrier, then the demand takes care of itself and you're helping a lot of people. And so initially that was actually access to online intelligence for retailers and travel agents back in the 2000s in my first company. I then joined Google and Meta and then started another company focused on access to data for construction companies, real-time data using drones, and then started a company called PayJoy, which is access to financial services for the next billion, specifically using smartphones and proprietary software on smartphones. And the story behind this was I was, speaking with the founders and my colleagues at that company and trying to figure out how we can actually use AI within the context of PayJoy, of financial services, and found that there was this access issue where the solutions to actually use enterprise data with AI were either not compliant for a licensed entity or were extremely expensive. Non-compliant is uploading to ChatGPT and similar and hoping for the best. You don't really have a lot of control. And very expensive is services like Glean, or Microsoft is happy to take your money for virtual private clouds and private cloud systems. And those are very complex, expensive to run, sometimes even require full-time staff to actually run them. That's not really suitable for the vast majority of businesses. So we realized there was this access issue where, in theory, AI can be transformational. In practice, for people, especially in regulated industries, there's a control problem. I want more control over what data is shared. So we set out to solve that problem. Me and my co-founder, Cooper, who I met at PayJoy, one of the first engineers at PayJoy, we set out to solve that issue. He had been at Lambda Labs for a while, which is one of the large AI research labs. He had dug into private AI, and we realized there has to be a way to not force that trade-off. You should be able to have safe, simple, and personalized AI and not have to choose only one of those. And so we set out to actually solve that issue, and that's what we've been working on.
So, what are some of the, it seems like you were solving against one specific use case as it relates to financial data, but there are a lot of other areas where both consumers and businesses are very concerned about control and safety, and they still want the level of personalization that AI can deliver. And so, obviously, healthcare is another one where due either to the regulations like HIPAA, you want to be very careful about who has what. And then, so financial services and healthcare, two of the more heavily regulated industries. But sometimes there are other industries, I would imagine, where just it's not a good idea to have one's information as either as a business or as a consumer, too accessible. So, what are the use cases that you're seeing as you deploy this out into the broader ecosystem?
Yeah, you're 100% right. As soon as you start talking about providing more control to people with sensitive data, a lot of people come out of the woodwork with really urgent and specific use cases that where they've been blocked. And we obviously as a company need to focus in terms of building a product on a certain initial customer profile, but we've been really heartened by seeing how many people have come out of the woodwork. So yeah, we started with financial services. We found actually there was strong product market fit with financial advisors who are dealing with their clients' most sensitive data and want to use AI to unblock some productivity constraints they're under. The average financial advisor has about 120 clients and can't get a single thing wrong lest they lose their license through their SEC and FINRA licensing. So there's actually a very high need there. And then I guess outside of that, there are a lot of other use cases that have emerged. So within the insurance use world, there are a lot of documentation requirements to actually start a new policy, renew policies. If you get anything wrong, you get something called a NIGO, a not in good order, which is really brutal from a cost and time point of view for these insurance folks. And that is something we can help them with using our AI systems. And again, those insurance forms have the most sensitive data, including social security numbers. You wouldn't want to upload them into ChatGPT or similar. And then moving beyond that, we've had really interesting inbounds, within healthcare, very high need for healthcare. There's an issue with using cloud LLMs and HIPAA compliance. Most cloud LLMs are not HIPAA compliant, and that's a challenge. Usually you need to go on-prem for that. We do support on-prem, which is great. And in fact, our first product was an on-prem solution for AI note-taking, which is currently live on our website on knapsack.ai. People can download it and start using it immediately for free. And it basically enables, on-prem storage for AI note-taking. And we also offer fully on-prem inference as well for people who want to have a HIPAA-compliant solution. We are a HIPAA-compliant organization, as well as being SOC 2. So that's the healthcare use cases are numerous. You have pre-authorizations, automatic drafting of pre-authorizations that requires very sensitive medical data. You have the scribe use case, which then leads to automated generation of billing codes. You do have some billing use cases on the back end that require automation. And of course, in healthcare, people are generally understaffed, right? They really need the help in any way they can on the administrative side. And then there are other interesting use cases that have emerged. Healthcare and finance are the ones that were on our mind, but we've actually had a lot of lawyers come to us. Lawyers are generally blocked from using AI in their firms. The ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini are all blocked. There's obviously client confidentiality concerns, a lot of other concerns. No lawyer wants to be the one to breach attorney-client privilege. And so having a system that gives them a lot more control is quite important. And there are some vertical AI solutions like Harvey, et cetera, in the legal field. But again, those are extremely expensive. And we are offering something that is self-serve, starts at free. You can upgrade to $100 per month, or even do $20 or $50 a month if you want, and immediately have control. And so we're in the early innings of this where lawyers can just sign up and start using it, right, without breaching attorney-client privilege, which is really exciting for them. And this is all really driven by our private architecture, where we have an architecture that uses either local inference or ephemeral compute. Ephemeral compute is where we do pass data to the cloud for inference, but the prompt and the output is deleted immediately once it comes back, which means no data is left on the cloud. And that is really important to people because ultimately there have been 12 to 14 data breaches last year, including from Change Health and from AT&T, companies you would expect would be very locked down. And so SOC 2 isn't enough. You really need to know where your data is going. And even if you do know, it's not necessarily safe. So you really want to limit your data footprint as much as possible. And that's really what we're enabling with our private AI architecture. And those use cases are compatible with that approach.
So, in the sort of scenarios you described, sometimes the financial information is about an individual, sometimes the financial information is about a company, right? And similarly, there are scenarios where a company having access to an AI that just is more intelligent about its own business intelligence or other elements of its business that are just in disparate databases and it's not easy to get answers about it. Do you sort of see what you've built as being equally useful, where it's taking a corpus of information that is company wide and making that secure and accessible and safe, as well as individual level data?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually just launched a product called Knapsack Studio, which solves that exact problem. So, we heard from our users who are using our individual product, which is Knapsack Assistant. Hey, I'd like to actually access enterprise data. I'd like to invite my colleagues in to also access this, and I'd like to use it across my company. And we do primarily deal at this point with small, medium-sized companies and starting to have larger enterprise conversations. But yeah, that is something that has emerged. And so Knapsack Studio solves that problem. And it's really interesting because you can really think about having a second brain sort of inside the company, constantly thinking about what can be done to get the people in the company towards a goal. And you can have it working on a push basis, not just a pull basis. You can have it actually looking at your data and proposing things that the people should be doing to work towards that goal. And I think that's where AI is going to really start accelerating people's productivity. And I generally feel like before we have mass job displacement, which we very well may have, we will have a period where there'll just be mass productivity and people will feel very, very empowered because they can actually just have things suggested to them and they can be empowered to take action. And in industries that have licensing, that I think there the job displacement will not be as large, considering you still need individuals actually pushing the buttons because they're the ones who are legally liable for the output of whatever is being produced.
Right, right. That's a great point. In the world of marketing, which is where I spend most of my time thinking about marketing data sets, which are supposed to layer up into profitability data sets, right, where are often disjointed, right? So marketing managing teams, even at the CMO level, sometimes use proxy variables because they don't actually have the ability to tie those proxy variables tightly to the outcomes that they really want, which is profit maximization or some combination of revenue maximization and profit maximization. And it would seem like there may be opportunities for something like this to sort of facilitate that, right? When there are disparate data sources and there's no single source of truth, and so they're using, a CAC, number, which is a blended CAC, not taking into account the fact that LTVs across clients are hugely different, right? When you're acquiring customers in B2B, or in the case of B2C, right? They're not taking lifetime customer value into account and looking at the data that predicts that, right, on the marketing spend side. So I'm curious if you see this as having a place within the at some point in the future within the marketing ecosystem, or if it seems like most of the other scenarios you describe are just more heavily regulated, which drives the security and privacy buttons, it pushes those buttons as opposed to just taking something from must have to nice to have. Although it seems like maybe your studio system is already gone from wow, this is not driven off of security or regulatory as much as it is off of business KPIs.
I think for marketing, it's already a must-have, especially in regulated industries. So I'll give you a very specific example. So in financial services, specifically for RAs and people regulated by the SEC, every marketing asset they put out there needs to be compliant with certain SEC regulations. And usually there's a very complex and burdensome process where a third-party compliance firm reviews every LinkedIn post, every newsletter, every document that gets created to make sure it's compliant. There's back and forth. Sometimes people are trying to put something out quickly because their clients want it. Just imagine when Liberation Day happened, there was a lot of uncertainty about tariffs. I'm sure a lot of financial advisors wanted to get something out there, and it had to go through a process of 3 or 4 approvals. And at that point, things it might have already been out of date, and then they look stupid, right? So you can just see how incredibly onerous this is, right? And so with our system, you can immediately check everything for SEC and FINRA compliant instantaneously, and you can basically automate that step and get something out instantly, right? And that's actually a really important use case. Now that's in financial services. I'm sure there are a lot of other situations where some marketing asset has to actually go through a internal approval process from a policy point of view. There might be an internal policy, right? There might be branding guidelines that needs to be checked for. There might be other regulation sets if you're in the healthcare context that you need to go through. And yeah, if you're trying to live in the modern age where digital advertising needs to be real time, especially in a social media context, you really want to be able to move very quickly. And so, yeah, I think that was where safe and simple AI is really important. And then I do want to talk about the third element of what we're doing, which is personalized AI. So, this is where we can actually match your tone and match your brand values and also get full context of your historical data to make sure whatever is being produced, is exactly what you would want to have put out there. And this has generally been the struggle with AI. AI is very smart and knows nothing about you. There's a saying that actually everything in your typical chatbot is a hallucination because for the most part, they know nothing about you. They're just guessing what you want to hear based on what you put in. And so imagine if there's something that is still that smart, but also knows an incredible amount about you. Yeah. That would actually be a lot more powerful. Now, I think people are starting to realize the power of this with ChatGPT's memory feature, which is a relatively recent feature. And that feature is giving people a sense for, wow, this thing is really getting to know me, and it knows it can actually go back to a previous conversation I had and introduce that into this current conversation. We want to allow people to do that with full control. So we allow people to connect up to 1,000 applications into Knapsack. And then we use a protocol called MCP, which is a commonly used protocol now for connecting enterprise data. But we go a step further. We want to give people control for what data from their Google Drive, their email, their calendar, they want to share. So we're giving people more controls. And then on top of that, we're also allowing people to take that memory and use it across applications. So I'm sure you've had this experience. You're starting to use ChatGPT, you go deep into something, then you switch over to Claude or Gemini, and you have to reintroduce yourself completely because it doesn't actually remember what you did on ChatGPT. So with Knapsack Memory, you can actually bring your memories with you with every application you use. And right now, we're just talking about a small set of these chat applications. In the future, every application will have an AI capability. And so you'll be able to bring your memories safely and securely with you as you use these things with full control of what is and is not happening. And I should also make sure, without actually having all that data uploaded into these third-party applications, which I think is a privacy concern people have. So that's the direction we're moving right now.
Yeah, I think, and I'm sure this is in your investor decks, but that is certainly a killer application, right? I mean, I wish the number wasn't so large that I can't count the number of times that I said, oh, there was this guy I met last, February 2024, and he was in this particular business, and I'm pretty sure we had a Zoom, and then I'll go digging through my calendars trying to figure out who the heck this was, because all of a sudden that piece of information that I discussed with this individual or the thing that they pitched me became relevant, right? And so, I would love to be able to reverse download my entire life, back to when I was in my teens into an AI so that it remembered everything that I, might forget, right? And had a greater level of accuracy. Obviously some people might think that that's creepy, but as a fairly geeky person, I'd be particularly comfortable doing that if I felt like it was a safe and secure and highly controlled environment, which I might not feel comfortable doing in hooking, one of the more open AI chatbot LLM systems to everything I've ever done, everything I've ever said, in order to provide, a right-hand person, a digital right-hand person assistant for me. But it's certainly fascinating from the perspective of, providing clarity to people on a go-forward basis and a historical archive of what they've done, hopefully without hallucinations.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's basically pulling from actual data. So, then of course it's an MCP. So then other systems will pull from it and decide how to use that. LLMs will use it. I mean, you bring up a really important point about that example of, hey, I talked to someone a year ago. What did I say and what happened there? I think what we've realized over the last couple of years is that there's this whole highly valuable corpus of data that has not been digitized historically, and that is data from conversations, from us talking. Emails are all digitized, documents, etc., all digitized. We have structured data. But in the end, the conversations that happen in meetings are often very high signal in that, this is where you get a lot of context and people are, really thinking through, for the most part, what they're trying to say. And a lot of decisions are made in meetings. A lot of the most important decisions are made in meetings. So ultimately, having that be digitized is really important to ensure that if you're using an LLM, you're getting the full picture. And I think, like you were saying, yeah, I might have talked to someone 3 years ago, and I want to actually go back and understand what we talked about, especially if I'm meeting that person again. We learned very quickly that it was really important that we actually have our own meeting assistant, so we actually have access to that data because it's a new primitive. Email is a primitive, docs are primitives, meeting notes are a primitive that is going to be essential going forwards. And we didn't want to be reliant on any third parties for that data. Of course, if someone is using Fathom or something else to do their note taking, we're compatible with them and they can import that data. A lot of that data gets imported automatically into Google Drive or into CRMs, and so then we have access to it anyways. But ultimately, we wanted to make sure that we always have access to that data, and we also wanted to make sure people had a system where they had full control. And so we created Knapsack Assistant to give them full control over where that data is stored, which was a regulatory requirement for a lot of people in regulated industries.
So one other area that's sort of hot within the sales and marketing ecosystem, again, where I spend a fair amount of my mental energy, is this agentic world, right? Where, now it's, the merchant and or DTC brand and or travel booking engine that's not necessarily interacting with the human directly, but interacting with the human's agent, right? It knows the human very well, and it would seem like the better that the human agent knows that human, the more it can decide whether Turks and Caicos or Aruba is a better choice for this vacation, all other things being equal, the square footage of the room, the view of the ocean, et cetera, right? So I would imagine that a more robust access to that data by agents who are, agentic agents chatting with other APIs or other AIs will be able to perhaps delight the consumer or delight the business better as a business is making decisions as well, or making travel bookings or whatever that the business's needs are. Do you believe that sort of API level access to that and the ability for your systems to facilitate better decisioning is an important part of your future roadmap?
Absolutely. I think this is why we think Knapsack Memory is so powerful. So Knapsack Memory is an MCP, which means it's available as an endpoint to LLMs, in clients like Claude or ChatGPT or Cursor or Windsurf, the ones that early adopters are using now. And it's available to agents to interact with directly. You can give agents access to this endpoint, and then it can use that as a basis. So, for example, let's say there's a travel agent. Let's take your example with Aruba. There's a travel agent that's trying to help you, organize your trip. If you wanted to do this now, you'd probably have to do a very detailed prompt with a lot of background information in ChatGPT. Pro users could go in and do something in the system prompt, if you know what you're doing. Maybe you have a really detailed system prompt. And then even there, it might not know everything about your preferences, right? You might forget something. You might forget that, your wife had complained in the past about being too close to the beach or too far away from the beach, right? And so ultimately, you really want to capture as much as possible there. And I guess this is a consumer use case, so we're dealing
Yeah.
more with professional use cases on our side. But yeah, just to maybe switch over to possible consumer use cases. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, imagine not having to write that system prompt, not having to connect any of your other data sources, but really just adding one URL into the system and saying, this is me, use this to book the vacation, right? And then when you're done, just rescind the URL and they don't have access to the data anymore, right? And you can also monitor what data they're using, right? To see what data is access to. And of course, you're in control. You can decide if there are certain parts of your memory that you don't want them to have access to. That works as well. And so it provides that level of personalization you're talking about. But I think, you could think of it as a cookie for LLMs and for the age of AI, the age of intelligence, with a really important caveat, which is you're in control of the cookie, right? The cookies right now, I don't think anyone feels in control of the cookies. I'm a relatively technical person. I've looked into like what cookies are being tracked. It's a minefield. It's just really difficult to figure out. And so I think having a real authentic sense of control over what data is being shared is going to make people a lot more comfortable to enrich their memories and use it much more often.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, the cookies is a segue into the final topic of conversation I'd love to do, which is the Brave browser, who sort of tackled the personal privacy element of browsing from the perspective of trying to empower the consumer into having more control over their cookies and over where their cookies get used and when. And it's a fascinating case study because the more you clamp down on cookie use, including third-party cookie use, the crappier your experience is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so there's this balancing act that everybody has to play, which is if they want to remain anonymous, they're going to get served ads that are completely irrelevant. And the more though that cookie and anonymized user ID ecosystem with hashed identifiers, right? The more that they can know that you are you, or at least that you are somebody who likes to travel and golf and drives a VW Jetta or a BMW or a Lamborghini, right? Those are really useful from the perspective of providing you a better experience. And so, I think Braves got a noble cause, but I think to some extent, in execution, it sometimes fails. And I do like this, the way you're addressing it, right? Sort of finds that balance, right? That because the access URL is potentially rescindable and controllable, one could conceivably have their cake and eat it too. There are obviously going to be latency and lag issues, and that the cookie infrastructure is designed so that decisions can be made in 100 milliseconds, which isn't necessarily always the case. With any kind of API access, but it does at least point in a direction that you may be able to find a win-win scenario in the future.
Well, you can imagine agents producing cookies and then rescinding them on a case-by-case basis, right? So you can plug into that existing infrastructure and reduce the latency. I also think latency is always like a bit of a temporary problem, in the world of centralized systems. I mean, even within decentralized systems, latency has now come under milliseconds, with Solana, et cetera. So I do think it's always good to build with the assumption latency will get better, because you're always then on the right path. I do think, well, let me ask you, like, what would it take for you to use a new browser at this point? And when's the last time you switched browsers?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot, to switch browsers for me. I'm still on Chrome,
Yeah.
and I looked at Brave and I've looked at some others, and there's a certain amount of inertia that comes from bookmarks and from other things that yeah, some of those are transferable. We certainly password managers now can be cross device, and so probably the perceived headwind is not as much as the true headwind, but I would have to really be convinced of a significant user benefit for me beyond privacy. I'm not a particular stickler for
Yeah.
privacy. I mean, my
Mm.
life's pretty much an open book. And it's pretty boring as well. So I'm less concerned about that than perhaps some other folks are. But it's certainly for folks for whom that is a big concern. A lot of them did make the switch to Brave, and I think to some extent saw some compromises that they had to make. I'll be interested to see sort of how the industry, including your platform and other platforms like yours, find a way to sort of allow for everybody to win. And I've had folks on the podcast before that have built systems that really bring us much closer to that, right? With the ability to anonymously through clean rooms and data lakes and such create this win-win scenario. So I do think that there's going to be an evolution towards that remains privacy compliant, not just from a purely regulatory perspective, but also just from a, taking the high road as the consumer, with regards to the consumer, not having given away too much of themselves in order to get relevancy in their advertising.
Yeah, I think that consumer control is key. And, in modern life, there's a trade-off between privacy and convenience. And 9 times out of 10 people choose convenience, like you were saying, right? This has been our tradition, right? Our treasured tradition as Americans is to always choose convenience. So I think that is probably going to continue. And I think the only solution to that really is to get rid of that trade-off, right? So, passkeys is a great example. So all of a sudden there's something more secure that is also more convenient for people. I guess Face ID is another great example of that. You don't have to remember password and it's more secure. So ultimately, I think getting rid of that trade-off is really the core thing. And for me, I feel like that's really control. If you give people more control and it works better and it still gives them the same experience, you've really achieved what most consumers want and what most users, enterprise users want as well. But we don't really talk a lot about our browser plans. I'm really interested about what happens with Comet, with GenSpark has a browser. There are a couple of new browsers emerging. I personally switched from Chrome to Arc about 2 years ago. And that was smoother than I thought, to be honest. It allowed me to import everything. And it's built on Chrome. So as most things are, they're built on Chromium. So I think that was a relatively smooth transition. And so your locally grown browser in New York as well. So you might want to look into that. Yeah. So I feel it's interesting to see with Chromium that the level of effort required to build a browser is lower than it's ever been. It's also interesting to see that it's been challenging for new browsers to achieve scale, like Brave and Arc. For example, Arc I don't think has achieved what they wanted to achieve. So I think from my perspective, what that really is that people have really reached a peak in terms of how many native applications they want to download to their computer. For the most part, there has to be a very compelling reason to do that, and it has to be an overwhelming reason. And so that means the product challenge is a very high challenge, And so ultimately, and of course, there's a trust element that happens if you're having a desktop app. That's probably a higher trust element than with websites that you have to take into account. Do you use a Mac or a PC?
I have both, but I'm mostly on a PC. I'm on a PC now.
Yeah, so I'm on a Mac usually, but a lot of our clients are on PCs. It is really pretty wild if you're not on a PC for a while to see the onboarding flow when you install an application on a PC, how many steps you have to go through, how many approval processes, especially if you're in a corporate PC.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible as a desktop app. We had to work so hard with our Knapsack Assistant to make sure that was a smooth process for people.
Yeah, and I can certainly validate your perspective on there being a pretty high bar on additional installs of a browser extension. So back when I was running WeCare, starting over 20 years ago, which was a predecessor to Amazon Smile, we had the WeCare Reminder, and it was tough just to get people to install a browser extension. We raised over 8 million for nonprofits that way. And luckily, there's a segment of the audience that dollar-free philanthropy was enough of a incentive for them, right? Where they were like, okay, this costs me nothing; it's paid for by affiliate commissions, and so I'm going to change my shopping behavior somewhat, in that I'm just going to at least see whether or not the merchant that I'm participating in is participating in the program or not,
right?
Or about to purchase it. So I saw that it required a fair amount of convincing.
Yes.
And as Giving Forward, my nonprofit, releases its browser extension later this year, we'll once again have to, make sure the level of trust is high, but also in addition to the level of trust, there'll probably only be a certain segment of the audience that feels like, they're willing to make that trade-off so that their nonprofit is supported. We'll see.
Yep. That sounds exciting. That's awesome.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Mark, for joining me and discussing the great stuff that you're working on. It really does sound exciting, and I'll be looking forward to tracking it more carefully.
That's great. Yeah, and if listeners are still interested in learning more, they can go to knapsack.ai, and all our stuff is free to use, whether it's our meeting assistant or Knapsack Studio. You can start free, and interested, pay for more. So please give it a try. And thank you very much for your leadership on this.
Oh, thanks, Mark. We'll talk soon.
All right, bye-bye now.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.